and testing tax credits as well. So this is a wish list that the White House wants, and it's not just Speaker Pelosi and Democrats who they're going to have to be negotiating with, Jonathan. They're also going to have to negotiating with the Republican caucus. There is not widespread agreement on several of those points, most notably the payroll tax cut. And if that wasn't enough for the administration, they're also running against the clock. Take a look at this timeline for how specific this is going to get, especially as it comes down to the wire. In just a few short days, the administration is going to be facing some unemployment benefits expiring, not to mention the last day of the eviction moratorium on July 24th rather, and the final $600 unemployment payments sometime either in late July. Congress is due for that recess in early August, but they want to get that done. Again, that stimulus done before them.
Kevin, they're not just up against the clock, they're up against the polls. And I think that's clear to see. The President of the United States over the weekend said the polls were fake. He actually outlined a series of nuances that maybe we should discuss at some point. But more broadly, what we saw in the last 24 hours was the first sign of panic from a Republican senator, and it was a senator from Texas, Senator Ted Cruz. How significant was that?
Well, it's massive. I mean, for Senator Cruz to go on Fox and to sound the political alarm and say that there's a race in Texas, I mean, that is remarkable. I mean, this would be like California going Republican. This is such a Republican stronghold, has such a history with the Bush wing contingency of the Republican Party. And Senator Cruz, mind you, he knows a thing or two about tough re-election fights. He just defeated Beto O'Rourke, the former Democratic congressman. So for Senator Ted Cruz to say that is quite remarkable, and I think it points to a broader issue, Jonathan, that especially if you're outside of Washington and trying to figure out the long-term policy implications here, there's a significant chance, as Leader McConnell has been telling some Republican donors, that the Senate is increasingly competitive for a potential flip come November 3rd.
Unbelievable. Once unthinkable, increasingly believable. Still feels unthinkable. Kevin Cirilli down in Washington, D.C. on the polls, the clock, and the race against time for this administration and the policy effort. J.P. Morgan's David Kelly writing the following: it is the pandemic rather than any lack of stimulus that is holding the economy back. The stock market may be vulnerable to a correction given the short-term risk that the recovery will peter out and the long-term consequences of all the stimulus being pumped into the economy in a rather inefficient effort to prevent this. David joins us right now. So, David, how does that shape your thinking for this U.S. equity market?
Well, I think you have to be cautious overall. I mean, there are some opportunities. I think the middle of the market is kind of unloved here. It seems like there are almost two camps of investors: those who are very scared and those who are very bullish. And you can see money pouring into bonds and some tech stocks. But the middle of the market looks somewhat cheaper. So there's some opportunities there. And there's opportunities overseas. I mean, the rest of the world is doing a better job in dealing with this pandemic than we are. To put it bluntly, other developed countries are getting past this faster than we are. And I think that should be an advantage to them economically in 2021. So I think you've got to look there also. But I do think you need to be cautious about the U.S. market, because this is not a V-shaped recovery. This is a V interrupted. It's going to be interrupted by the fact that this pandemic is not under control.
And the data we're about to see is about to give birth to that idea. The V interrupted is something you've been pushing now, David, and I just wonder how it shapes how you allocate capital in a moment like this and the volatility you expect going into November.
Well, yeah, I think you do. As I say, I think you just have to be relatively cautious. Just don't get out over your skis here. Eventually, the economy will recover. There will be a vaccine. We're making very good progress, really, on treatments also, and so the mortality rate has come down. So we are making progress here. But I think just keep an eye on valuations more than anything else here, because there are things which are overvalued in this market, given the risks that are out there.
What's overvalued right now, David? There seems to be this story where we've shifted away from valuations and people just focus on the narrative. And the narrative in big tech America is so powerful that if you don't own them, you're lagging, and it's almost a career risk. And we know when it feels like that, things are getting a bit dangerous, David. So I just wonder, for big tech, is that what you're discussing right now when you say things feel overvalued?
Well, yes. I mean, I'm not going to talk about individual names, but there's a difference between career risk for a portfolio manager who's going to make their numbers this year and long-term portfolio risk for an investor who's got to make good money over the next 5 to 10 years. So from a long-term investor perspective, just if you have a very large company, no matter how good it's been operating or how great the space is, just ask yourself the question: how could they grow fast enough, grow their earnings, their margins fast enough to actually justify their stock price? And there are a lot of stocks, as I say, I'm not going to mention individual names, but there are lots of them where you can look at it and there is no model that's going to get you to the level of profitability that justifies the current stock price.
So where do you go? And help me identify, help my audience identify where not to go, what is and what is not a value trap.
Well, I think, first of all, U.S. financials look pretty good because they are much better capitalized than in 2008, and this is not a 2008 recession, so that's one place to go. The other place I would say is take a look at other developed country international stocks. Europe has done a better job with the pandemic. They just passed this big coronavirus relief bill, and importantly, a degree of fiscal unity in Europe, which we have not seen before, which I think will be a long-term positive for the European Union. That's something to think about. Japan is doing a pretty good job with the virus. The rest of East Asia is doing a better job too. So I think there's opportunities in East Asian emerging markets and in Europe here and in Japan. I think that those are all places which are unloved and neglected by U.S. investors.
David, just a final word on Europe, if I may. Back in July of 2012, it took a while for the penny to drop about what President Draghi was about to do at the ECB. Is there a similar dynamic playing out here, that we haven't got that huge eureka moment in Europe on the fiscal side, but maybe over time we start to realize what's happening before our own eyes?
Oh, absolutely, because think about what it means. What they've said is they're going to essentially issue euro-denominated or euro debt by the European Commission, so a large chunk of common debt. And that is really a degree of fiscal unity. Now, it doesn't mean fiscal policy will be unified or as big as it is here in the United States all the time, but in times of crisis, it's there. And that's what the real problem with the European debt crisis is. There was nobody to help Greece or Portugal or Spain or stop them from falling into the abyss. But what this says is not only do you now have monetary support in a crisis, you've got fiscal support too. And those are two great protections against crises, which reduce the risk to the European economy and ultimately to European equities.
The slow erosion of redenomination risk on the continent. David, always appreciate your time. My best to you and the whole of the team over at JP Morgan. Coming up on this program, the analyst action you need to know. That'll be next in our morning calls, and later, looking forward to catching up with Mona Mahajan, Allianz Global Investors US investment strategist, in your market this morning. Equity futures up 19, positive 0.6%. The opening bound just around the corner. It's Tuesday morning. Good morning. This is Bloomberg TV. You have a deal in Brussels. Europe finally brokering an agreement, helping send equity futures stateside up 20 on the S&P 500, up 0.6%. We spark a global equity market rally. That's the price action. Let's get you some morning calls, shall we? A look at some of the analyst recommendations on Wall Street this morning. First up, JMP Securities downgrading Tesla to market perform from outperform. The analysts saying that shares are now fairly valued heading into Wednesday's very important earnings report. Full coverage right here on Bloomberg. Next up, Bank of America upgrading Halliburton to a buy with an $18 price target. The analyst citing effective cost-cutting measures and an improving outlook. That stock up by 4.5% in early trading. And your third and final call, BTIG downgrading Toll Brothers to a sell, a $27 price target. The analysts expecting luxury homes, urban markets less likely to benefit from the coronavirus pandemic. That stock is negative around about 1%. That's the price action this morning. Coming up on the program, Mona Mahajan, Allianz Global Investors US investment strategist, with equity futures up 21 on the S&P 500, positive 0.6%. The opening bow this Tuesday morning, next on Bloomberg.
I'm in downtown Mexico City, where there's quite a lot more movement than before because the downtown is beginning to reopen. Some businesses are still shut down and others are open, so they're alternating days of the week in which they can open. There are a lot of people wearing masks, almost everyone is. The city also tried implementing a rule that would limit the flow of people to downtown. Mexicans are being very cautious.
The Nissan Ariya is the one that represents for the Nissan new chapter. I would say that the Nissan has a great experience because we have 10 years of the history through the Nissan Leaf. We have learned a lot of the voice from the customer.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Big Tech America roaring back to start the trading week. We are set to add some more weight to yesterday's rally. Equity futures up this Tuesday morning by 21 points on the S&P 500, positive 57 on the Nasdaq, up around, in and around 0.5% here across the board. Switch up the board in the bond market. Treasuries unchanged, yield 0.61% on the US 10-year. The focus on the fiscal side, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin holding talks today. In the FX market, euro slightly negative following that deal over in Brussels. Euro dollar 114.39, down around about 0.1%. And crude with a bid, back to a 42 handle, $42 and around about 8 cents, up by 3 percentage points on a session. That's your cross-asset price action. Let's get to the market desk and get you some movers. Here is Abigail Doolittle.
John, lots of stocks moving to the upside to talk about. Let's start out with the airlines and the travel and leisure sector, because we have lots of green on the screen here. These stocks are popping higher. This, of course, on continued vaccine hopes. This makes sense given that most of these stocks, in fact, all of these stocks, are down between 40 to 70% this year alone on the pandemic hit. So folks are hoping that if a vaccine comes into place, that will be a shift and a recovery. So today, a little bit of that happening. As for some earnings movers, starting out with IBM, Big Blue put up a solid beat of hugely lowered numbers, though. It is worth noting that the revenue driven by big cloud demand, lots of street price targets were hiked on what's being called a good, clean report, but some are still nervous that this trend might not continue into the end of the year, but nonetheless, the stock higher today. Coca-Cola also put up a beat on lowered numbers, at least on the bottom line. Revenues actually missed slightly. Both are down about 30% year over year. So the stock being higher perhaps reflects relief. It wasn't worse with stadiums, theaters, and other public venues closed during that June quarter for the most part. UBS popping higher as well, adding $9 billion in new money to its wealth unit. Bond traders had their best quarter in 8 years. Revenues up nearly 120%, similar to some of the other big banks that we've been talking about. And then finally, John, Philip Morris, another big beat, yes, of hugely reduced numbers. But what investors like here, they had withdrawn their forecast. They've actually provided an upbeat outlook. Earnings view is better than expected. So folks like the visibility after it had been pulled. John?
Abigail, thank you. 2 minutes into the session, adding to the gains on the S&P 500. A third straight day of gains on the S&P, up by 0.5%. The rally so far this year taking us into positive territory on the S&P 500. The bounce back from the lows, we're now at a 5-month high. For the NASDAQ 100, we're up 25%. Year to date. An unbelievable tech rally. This morning, the NASDAQ up by around about 0.5%. In the last 24 hours, we caught up with Nuveen's Bob Doll. He weighed in on the earnings and the recent tech rally.
When estimates were falling for everything but those big tech stocks, people just plowed into the big tech stocks. Now with the economy coming back, those earnings for those other companies are doing a bit better. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. You've got to pick your names. I don't like Netflix, but I like many of the others in that category. So you can be long one and short the other and make some alpha that way. Stock selection's key.
Or you can just be long the NASDAQ 100 and you're up 25% year to date. I know it's not that simple, Katie Lyons, but it has been absolutely staggering.
Yes, it certainly has, John. Bob Doll may be picking stocks, but broadly, investors seem to just be picking tech. After underperforming the S&P 500 by the most since 2009 last week, starting this week off with a rapid recovery, the NASDAQ 100 rallying nearly 3% in yesterday's session and trading at yet another record high. This morning, this rally has pushed the index to 21% above its 100-day average. It is the largest gap above that trend line we've seen since all the way back in the year 2000, aka the dot-com bubble. Now, of course, a large part of this is the most mega cap names. They alone added $261 billion to their market values in just yesterday's session. The big driver of that, of course, was Amazon. It jumped nearly 8%, recovering all of last week's losses in just one day. That in part due to a price target raise over at Jefferies on growing e-commerce trends. The rally off the back of that equated to $117 billion boost to the company's market cap. I also might add a record $13 billion to Jeff Bezos's personal fortune. Now, this is really continuing a story of Amazon and other stay-at-home stocks' dominance this year, both outpacing the NASDAQ 100 and the broader market. With its gain of more than 70% year to date, it has been the largest points contributor to the S&P 500 so far this year, then followed by Apple and Microsoft. As evidenced by those white and blue lines on this chart here, John, it's a tale of broad tech outperformance. The question is what the direction of these tech stocks will be going forward. Do they retain their market dominance, or do they lose favor as we move further into the recovery? Earnings likely, of course, to be a big test for the sector, as Bob Dahl alluded to, trading at multiples of 30 times profits. Expectations are pretty high, John.
Some of these numbers are absolutely unbelievable. It has been staggering. I'll repeat that word again. Kelly Lyons, thank you. This is what Allianz's Mona Mahajan had to say on tech earnings. She wrote the following: generally, the large cap tech rally ahead of earnings may make the group somewhat vulnerable as we get through earnings season and modest outlooks. Conversely, the beaten down reopening sectors may fare better as reports come out in line or ahead of lowered expectations. Mona joins us right now. Mona, I've heard this argument also from BTIG's Julian Emmanuel. He shares your view that the bar is a whole lot higher for big tech and a whole lot lower for the cyclical areas of the market. Is an earnings beat and playing the expectations game the right way to play this over the medium term?
Yeah, look, I think last week we saw the first of the big FANG names really report, and that was Netflix, and they had a phenomenal quarter. Of course, their outlook was a little softer, and they got hit on that. That compares to some of the other, call it non-tech reopening stories where markets are giving those names so far a little bit more of a pass. Now, keep in mind, and we heard from Bob Dole this morning, Netflix valuation of the FANGs, for example, is quite a bit more extreme. We will get this week. Microsoft will get next week. Amazon, Google, Facebook. So all the big large cap tech names that we've all been watching due to report in the next couple weeks. What I will say, last week's dip in tech, where we did see the reopening story once again, very short-lived, outperform. What we saw after that was buyers started to come in, and that buy the dip mentality came back to life. And that's probably driven by some technical factors as well, including the fact that there is still elevated cash on the sideline. There are still players, particularly institutional players, that haven't participated in this 40% plus rally now. And so it gave us a little bit of an inkling of what might happen if we do get another dip in large cap tech. So something to keep in mind as we move forward over the next few weeks.
Mona, this is really important, this point about this sector still being somewhat under-owned. When we get the fund manager survey from Bank of America, pretty much month after month it says this is the most crowded trade, long US tech. Are you convinced, though, that we've seen the capitulation?
Generally our view is that in order for the S&P to really have a sustained rally, you need to broaden this participation. You need to see some of these beaten up cyclical reopening names start to participate. However, we're not sure if that sustained participation from the reopening sector happens yet. It will probably need a catalyst such as perhaps a vaccine, but not only a vaccine, a sustainable plan for a vaccine, manufacturing, distribution, et cetera, or we'll have to see better health results. And clearly, we have not yet seen a sustained downturn in some of the hot spots we're seeing, of course, in states like California, Florida, Arizona, et cetera. And so I think we need to see those. If you look at the last 10 years, for example, value has only outperformed growth about 4 times in a sustainable way. But during those 4 times, that outperformance lasted about 6 to 12 months. So for that to happen, we think we need some really better fundamentals. Until then, I do think this, stay-at-home tech story, secular growth in a low-rate environment will continue to perform, and we'll continue to see buyers on dips.
That's the difference between the call for the rotation now and the rotation that we started to see going into early June. That the rotation going into early June actually had the data to back it up. We reopened, had a series of upside positive surprises. The point that you're making, Mona, is that the data is about to test us. We're about to see the economy essentially stall out and see it right before our eyes in the hard data for things like the jobs report that we could expect in the next coming months as well. And with that in mind, Mona, do we need to see these earnings from these tech players to really break down on a sustainable basis? We need to prove that they are still vulnerable to cyclical headwinds, because so far we haven't seen that over the last several months. Do you expect they will be tested?
Yeah, I do think we'll get another period of some sort of consolidation in these names. There has to be some profit taking that occurs along the way. And typically earnings tends to be a period that, you can sell the news, et cetera, take the profits. Perhaps the best is behind you in some cases. For tech, it's not only a 1-year theme, 3-year theme, it's really a 5 and 10-year long-term, secular growth theme in some of these areas like, cloud computing or cybersecurity, or even the 5G that's just evolving now. And so it's harder to call, a complete rollover in the sector. What we will expect, though, are periods of consolidation, and particularly, as we see the broadening of this rally, there may be a rotation out of some of the large cap grab tech into some of the cyclical players. But to your point, you know, the data thus far doesn't support that. And that 4-week or so rally we saw in the cyclicals from mid-May to mid-June was really at the peak reopening. Since then, we've seen some states pause their reopening. We've seen some shutdowns and pullbacks in the reopening, and that may start to get reflected in the economic metrics like the July jobs report, or even, you know, some forms of retail sales, consumer confidence. We may start to see a little bit of softening, but you know, longer term, we continue to believe in the reopening of the economy, and that may come, you know, either through a vaccine or just through better health trends overall. That will drive the cyclical story.
Mona, we're fortunate to get you on the program today, and I always appreciate your time. Mona Mahajan there
Absolutely.
of
Thanks,
Allianz.
John.
Thank you. Let's head to the market desk, shall we, and catch up with Abigail Doolittle. Hey, Abigail.
Hi there, John. Well, we have more stocks moving to the upside in line with the markets on the morning, starting out with one stock soaring, Hibbett Sports, the small cap sporting goods store. That stock is absolutely soaring, up more than 20% after saying that sales have been, quote unquote, exceptional in the current quarter. They're saying that this is due to pent-up demand plus government stimulus, store closures by the competition. We also have peers such as Foot Locker and Dick's Sporting Goods popping as well. Tapestry up 3.4%. There's a management shakeup at the retail company. The CEO has resigned. The CFO has been named the interim CEO, and you can imagine that stocks or that investors are happy about some sort of change. The stock is down more than 70% since its 2018 peak, so a bit of a relief rally today. iBio, the biotech company, up 6.7%. It's incredible, John. This company is up more than 2,500% year to date. Over the last 2 days alone, up 84%. They, of course, have a vaccine candidate in conjunction with a Beijing company, so much optimism around these stocks. We see iBio participating. Novavax, the proof is in the pudding. They will be presenting phase 1 study results today around 10 o'clock. This stock up 34%, 3,400% year to date, John. Let's see whether or not the results for that phase 1 vaccine study will match the expectations of that huge, huge rally on the year, John.
Abigail, thank you. Thank you very much. Equities advanced on the S&P 500. They fade a little bit on the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ down by 0.1%. More market coverage still to come. Coming up on this program, Jim Karen of Morgan Stanley, global macro strategist, on a very controversial pick for the Federal Reserve and an important Senate Bank Committee hearing a little bit later today. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Best, your weekly review of the most important business news, analysis, and interviews from Bloomberg Television around the world.
Ken Burns, welcome to Bloomberg Big Decisions.
We have always been a mixture of things. We are always stronger for that mixture.
Growth is a way to stay competitive, delight more and more consumers.
Welcome to the Best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang.
They've moved the needle by acknowledging that they have to monitor the content.
What is one word of advice you'll take with you?
Learn how to listen. And that is certainly something that has served me well.
Ankiti, where do you go from here?
It's a huge market. It's a huge opportunity. I want to go 100x from here.
Our philosophy is to partner where we can and stand apart when we should.
Some things you see coming. Some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. Pablo from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on, so you can keep on.
14 minutes into the session, equities advanced on the S&P by 0.6%. The Nasdaq holds unchanged after a massive session yesterday for the Nasdaq 100. That's your equity market here in the United States. Here's the conversation down in Washington. The Senate Banking Committee set to vote on the Trump administration's Fed nominees later this afternoon. Senator Chris Van Hollen weighing in on controversial pick Judy Shelton.
We're talking about the Federal Reserve, the machinery of the U.S. economy. When she talks about, going back to the gold standard, when she talks about getting rid of things like federal deposit insurance, these are things that are pretty scary. The only pattern is a political one. She was very opposed to lower interest rates, but now that President Trump has been calling for lower interest rates, all of a sudden, there she is, calling for the same.
It was a pick that was drowning in doubt for several months, and then all of a sudden in the last 24 hours, it's almost become a reality. Bloomberg's Katie Lyons joined us now. Hey, Kaylee.
Hey, John. Well, the close ties to President Trump, the public support for his policies that Senator Van Hollen was alluding to, they're not the only controversy surrounding Judy Shelton, but some of her monetary policy views as well. Of course, as Van Hollen said, previously advocating for a return to the gold standard, questioning the efficacy of the Fed's dual mandate. We can bring you a quote from a recent op-ed that Shelton wrote. She wrote that short-term interest rates should be lower than long-term interest rates. It's a basic premise of sound finance and rational investment conditions. It would be appropriate and constructive for the Fed to consider international monetary stability in its interest rates decisions. America's central bank should not ignore the effects of movements spurred by other major central banks. Now, I would note here, John, that yes, given all this controversy, she may still be nominated by the Senate Banking Committee today, but that is not the only hurdle she faces. She still has to be confirmed by the full Senate. And if that happens, there could be major implications, especially considering that critics have warned that if Trump wins re-election, he could elevate her to replace Jay Powell as Fed chair when his term ends in 2022. It raises a Fed independence question as well as that inflation question, John, because she has advocated for a long time for eliminating inflation entirely, even at the 2% level targeted by the Fed. She sees that as a distortion of the free market. And on that note on inflation expectations, John, just take a look here at break-even rates. We've seen a recovery in the inflation outlook for the U.S., reflecting a view that the Fed is going to continue to push that monetary gas pedal, allow inflation to run even above its own target in the process. And that, of course, is pressuring real yields even lower, nearing negative 90 basis points at this point, John.
Kelly Lyons, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to turn to Jim Karen and Morgan Stanley now to continue an important conversation. Jim, fantastic to catch up with you, sir. Let me just read out a couple of lines from an op-ed that Judy Shelton did in the Wall Street Journal going back to September of last year when she wrote the following: "It would be in keeping with its historical mandate if the Fed were to pursue a more coordinated relationship with both Congress and the president." Now, Jim, if someone came on this program and said those words, I don't think it would sound too controversial in the moment that we're in right now. It's when an advisor to the president says it and they're about to become a pick on the Federal Reserve that I think things get a little bit more controversial. Do you think that if this pick is confirmed, it could erode, just on the margin, perhaps even more so, that's up for you to tell me, the illusion or the perception of central bank independence? Do you think we could erode that with this pick?
Well, I think it's reasonable to think that. I mean, given that, effectively the central bank, the Fed's independence is probably one of the strongest and best parts of the Fed, and that's exactly what you want. So you do want people thinking more independently minded, because we don't want the Federal Reserve becoming, one party's choice of membership on the Federal Reserve Board. Essentially, what we want on the Federal Reserve are very smart, economic-minded people who can make decisions based on the sound, logic and reason of economics. So, definitely any partisanship in either direction is not very, very good. So I do think that this is something to think about, but just remember, this is one vote. This is one person of many. The Federal Reserve is a very unique academic organization, and it's very, very hard for things that are too far out the mainstream to really make it into the actual actions.
I'm all for breaking up groupthink. With that in mind, though, Jim, given the size of the institution and the way that others carry there, do you really think this would transform the institution that much?
No, I don't. I really don't. I think this would be, this would probably be an outlier viewpoint. She has other views in terms of gold and the gold standard, and and money supply and inflation and things of that nature. So look, that's a different academic approach to things. The one thing I'll say about the gold standard, because I know that she's been outspoken on that as well, is that, look, when central banks went to fiat currency, meaning that central banks determine the value of a currency by determining the value of the interest rate. So essentially what that means is that it's harder for a central bank to respond to a crisis or an overheating of the economy when they're on the gold standard versus when they're in a fiat currency mode, which is what they're in right now. They can raise and cut interest rates a lot more easily, and that tends to smooth the business cycle, and that tends to add to lower volatility and better sustainable growth over time. So that's something else to consider as well.
Jim, you bring up gold. Let's talk about real yields, which has fueled gold. Real yields and the currency. One comparison you've made, and I think it's really important, the last time that we had real yields in the United States, where they are right now, we had a very, very different currency. The dollar was much, much weaker. Jim, how much longer do you think this currency can hold up, given where real yields are currently priced?
Yeah, so look, if we go back to 2012, the last time real yields were at this level, the dollar index, if you look at the DXY, was at about 80 versus about 96 where it is today. So it was substantially weaker, and the euro was at about 1.3, not 1.14, which is where it is today. But what we have to do is we have to think about the transmission mechanism, right? So what is pushing real yields lower is a commitment to easier policy. Easier policy, whether it's the Fed, keeping interest rates low and continuing to voice that, or it's the federal government with various packages that, have come to market and might still come to market in the next week or two. All of that has increased inflation expectations because these are all stimulative packages for the economy. But the nominal 10-year yield, this is the magic here. The nominal 10-year Treasury, no matter what's been happening to equities, really hasn't gotten above 65 basis points for any real period of time. Yeah. So that's pushed real yields very, very low. And what that triggers is what the Fed calls a portfolio rebalancing, meaning that you can buy 10-year real yields in U.S. Treasuries at minus 87 basis points, or you could opt to buy equities or investment-grade corporates or high-yield bonds at a positive real yield. And that's what's inflating all these other assets, and that's by design.
So Matt Hornback, your colleague, has written something important. He said that cash is becoming a risk, that the opportunity cost becomes a career risk if you're sitting in cash and not allocating it elsewhere. And Jim, I imagine, is that something that resonates with you at the moment?
Absolutely. Look, if you're managing money, for a living, what we do at Morgan Stanley Investment Management is we have money to put to work for our clients. And sitting in cash because we're worried about things, yes, a portion of cash is always good and useful, but Matt has it absolutely right. If you just keep your money in cash and just hope that, well, maybe things will get worse and I'll look good, that's not the way to invest. We have to understand what's happening to financial asset prices and what's driving them. And what's driving them right now is a large dose of liquidity that's being added into the market from the Fed and also the federal government with their various fiscal, packages to support the consumer. What the markets care about the most, and this is a very, very important point, what the markets care about the most in the short term and intermediate term is liquidity. Financial asset prices move on liquidity coming into the market, and that's what's happening. In the long term, economic fundamentals and asset prices should be very, very well correlated. But we have to ask ourselves is what's pushing real yields down right now? And that is what's going to boost asset prices.
Jim, always love catching up with you. You helped us tease Matt Hornback for tomorrow as well. Jim Karen of Morgan Stanley up next. Tomorrow, we'll catch up with Matt Hornback of Morgan Stanley. Up next on this show, we'll get you the trading diary, the events through the day ahead. This is Bloomberg.
see coming, some things you don't. The trick is to be ready for anything. John from Infrastructure Support is working every day to keep essential market data flowing seamlessly. We keep on, so you can keep on.
Agreement in Brussels lighting a fire under this global equity market. The S&P up 0.75%. The Nasdaq not too far behind, up 1/3 of 1%. Big day ahead down in Washington, 11 a.m. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin meeting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. The Senate holding a GOP luncheon at 12:30 p.m. Eastern, where President Donald Trump is expected to appear. Former VP Joe Biden speaking later in Delaware at 1:45 p.m. The Senate Banking Committee voting on Fed nominees at 2 p.m. Eastern, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking with Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin at 3 p.m. Then to round things out, the President of the United States holding a news conference at 5 p.m. Eastern. From New York City this morning, good morning. This was the Countdown to the Open. This is Bloomberg TV.
Hi Vijay, I'm on short side. We sold short. You can see our short positions on euro, on our ticker. We have 3 short positions. Okay.
True diversification. That's what adding commodities exposure to your stock and bond portfolio can help provide. The Bloomberg Commodity Index is the standard for commodity market exposure. 23 traded commodities are represented: agriculture, livestock, metals, and energy. The Bloomberg Commodity Index is the benchmark most widely used by investment professionals globally. Track your commodity investments with a proven financial information partner. The Bloomberg Commodity Index. True diversification.
Months after Hurricane Maria, Puerto Rico is still in peril. Huge swaths of the island are still without power, running water, or access to medical care. Experts estimate that it will take years before these services are restored island-wide. Much of the blame has been placed on FEMA for a slow response in comparison to recent disasters on the mainland. But recovery from a disaster of this complexity and scale has proven more challenging than anyone anticipated. And filling the gaps between an overextended public sector and a suffering populace falls on the private citizens. Robert Anderson is a Puerto Rico resident of 4 years.
The eye of the storm came in south of El Yunque, swept up towards San Juan, and out to Arecibo. Everything on the right-hand side is what we call the dirty side of the storm.
This isn't his first time in a disaster zone. With a military and telecom background, Anderson worked on repairing damaged cell phone towers in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Some might be tempted to label him a disaster capitalist, seeking lucrative government contracts for his expertise. But as Anderson finds himself in the middle of a humanitarian crisis, he and his associates are developing a variety of pro bono recovery projects that target the island's hardest hit areas.
I see two Puerto Ricos. We're here in San Juan. They have telecommunications restored. They may or may not have power, but basic services are in place. They're able to get food. They're able to buy things. They're surviving. And when you look outside of the San Juan area, you can go 15 minutes from here and find areas that are devastated. I'm working on the devastated side.
Today, he's put together a boots-on-the-ground mission to provide medical care to some of the island's most isolated and vulnerable residents. Steve Berenbaum is one of Anderson's business associates. He offered an extra car and a set of hands.
So we received an initial report from a nurse that was out in the area. We're headed to the northeast region of Utuado for some people that are in need of urgent medical assistance.
Dr. Sally Priester is a physician from San Juan. She filled a van with medical supplies at her own expense and brought along a team of nurses. Google Maps estimated our first destination to be a 90-minute drive. But it didn't account for obstacles like this. Our first stop was the home of an 82-year-old blind Vietnam veteran. His roof was blown off by the storm, and he's been living alone in a back shed for nearly 2 months.
His cane actually got broken in the storm, so he's limited mobility. He has a number of medical ailments. Dr. Priester's having a look at him. We called the VA. They're going to get him set up with what he needs, get him stabilized so he can then be transported either to an evacuation center or off the island. It's when the chain gets broken, when those families that are connected to them leave the island or take off. These guys get left at the end of the road, and it's tough.
FEMA was not officially part of Robert's team, and their arrival caught everyone by surprise. Their job here was to survey and report back to their superiors, and did not come with medical aid of any kind.
People think that FEMA is there to hand out bottles of water. It's not what they do. FEMA has a role to play. They have a very specific role. They bring in ships, they bring in airplanes, they bring in tractor trailers with pallets of things. But they're a big machine, and there's gaps in that thing. And you're seeing one of the gaps here, and we help fill that role. These guys are in a bad situation before, and now they're struggling for real basic things. One of the risks that you run is people going from fear to hopelessness. Those are the folks that we're trying to reach.
And how are they reached? How are they even found?
Word of mouth, mostly.
And what's your role in all this?
Ghost in the machine. I'm lucky enough to be able to communicate with folks in FEMA, the state of Puerto Rico.
For a ghost, Robert makes his presence well known. Not only was he the de facto leader of the mission, now with FEMA in tow, he created his own maps to survey storm damage.
So we're right here.
And delivered them to FEMA HQ free of charge.
I have pretty good reach.
Perhaps that's how he managed to earn himself a coveted FEMA badge without actually working for them. And it's these relationships that allow him to operate more efficiently than an NGO or a government agency.
We're able to resolve problems at a different level.
next stop was on a mountaintop, a family of 11 struggling to care for their special needs brother in what was left of their house.
Probably we are the first health team to come and visit this family.
Muy bien, todo muy bien.
The patient has Down syndrome. He is all day in bed. The difficulty with this is the patient cannot be alone. The most important thing is that you need to take care of the chronic disease besides disability, because they have been not going to a doctor, and no doctor has come in here yet.
So we need a refill of this medication.
After maybe 54 days, it's not getting better. And the only way that you can be able to see that is coming to the ground, drive, and see the people and talk to the people.
You can see San Juan from here, but you can't get there. It's like the Emerald City.
On this stop, we caught word that a man living alone at the edge of the jungle was in need of care.
So we decided to take a little detour, come up here and check out and see what's going on. One of the challenges is to find those people that are at the end of these roads that need help.
¿Pero por qué estás solo? ¿Por qué estás por acá tan solo? I'm asking about why he's alone right here. He said things of life happens. Yeah, I'm here by myself. So ¿dónde vive acá? En la parte de... This is not a job. To do this, you need to have passion for what you can do. You're not going to get paid.
It's said in disaster response and emergency response that the real first responders are your neighbors. You don't need to wait for a lucrative FEMA contract to go out and do good and to help the community.
In the end, do you feel like you're making a difference?
Lives you touch and people that you can affect. I don't really think about it in those terms.
But why do you do it?
It helps me sleep at night. I think it's as much for the people that are going out to help and do things as it is for the people that you affect.
Whether out of altruism, or the lure of a paid gig, or some mixture of the two, Anderson hopes to stay here to help shape Puerto Rico's future.
Puerto Rico's essentially been a colony for 400 years. It was treated poorly by the Spanish. It was not treated well by the United States when they first got here. Puerto Rico can continue in the way that it's always been, or Puerto Rico can rebuild itself like nothing that's ever been. And we have to do everything we can to make that real. That's the bottom line.
When I met him first online, I found him to be really sweet. I think I was the one who was talking for an hour. He was just listening.
When we met, I saw her. She was beautiful, intelligent, and kind, which was, something that I was looking for.
Anshu and Sumit are one of about 12 million couples that get married in India every year. Unlike their parents' generation, they're not from two close villages, but from two cities on opposite sides of the country. And their love didn't start through community matchmaking, marriage brokers, or classified ads in newspapers, but began online.
So we met through jeevansati.com. So it's basically an online portal where we have detailed profile of different grooms and brides.
It makes a lot of remote profiles who are located in distant areas more accessible.
Thanks to growing internet and smartphone usage, matrimony websites and apps in India are starting to disrupt the matchmaking industry. More and more people are finding their partners at the click of a mouse. jeevansati.com, where Anshu and Sumit met, is one of the biggest players. Young Indians looking for love set up profiles including their caste and horoscope, but their criteria for choosing spouses appears to be changing.
We have seen the shift from traditional caste community conservative parameters to something like which is more focused on education, employment.
Anshu and Sumit's marriage was initiated by their parents, but modern Indian couples like them have more input than previous generations.
We looked up to them to agree for the proposal, but it was primarily our decision that we wanted to be with each other.
So what's the emoji you use the most to send to each other?
So there's a bear which basically we use for indicating a hug.
Yeah, that's our language basically, bear icon for a hug.
Time flies when you're in love, and just 1.5 months after they first met online, the couple got engaged. They decided to hold their wedding less than 3 months later. But planning a traditional Hindu wedding on such short notice is no easy task. The massive event usually lasts 3 days, has various ceremonies and celebrations, and involves the entire...
Hi Eric, you need to check our playlist. Go to our channel and check playlist, and you will see basically how much we make and what we trade. You can't just see our profit 1 second and move on. You have to follow our trades to see when we buy and when we sell it. All right? So I'll send you a link and you will check it again, okay?
People don't want to be limited to what is available around them. They want to know the entire range of options available before making a decision. And now it's easy to find almost everything on one portal.
Anshu and Sumit are officially married in a ritual that has gone on for thousands of years, but their love started in a very new way. Technologies might be changing the way couples meet, date, and get married in India, but they're definitely not changing everything.
The technology was only the first level help that we could get to find each other. Everything else was like very humanly and emotions and feelings based.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has become a symbol of everything the Republican Party stands against.
Everyone gets a right to basic health care. We need strong oversight of these banks.
A legal scholar and a consumer advocate turned politician, Warren has branded herself as a champion of the working class and made a career out of standing up to big business. While rumors of a 2020 presidency bid remain just that,
I'm not running for president.
her Senate seat is up for re-election in 2018, and Republicans are already pumping millions into super PACs to defeat her. This is the story of how a law professor and politician came to be seen as the biggest threat to Republican values and the greatest hope for progressive America. Elizabeth Warren was born Elizabeth Ann Herron, the youngest of 3 siblings, on June 22, 1949, in Oklahoma City to middle-class parents. After waiting tables to help her family pay the bills, Warren became a star on the high school debate team. She landed a scholarship to George Washington University at the age of 16, but 2 years later dropped out to marry her high school sweetheart, Jim Warren. By 1980, Warren was a mother of 2, divorced and remarried, had earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, a juris degree from Rutgers, and practicing law in New Jersey. Warren then went on to become an influential law professor, teaching, lecturing, and publishing highly cited work on bankruptcy and commercial law at 7 universities around the country, eventually settling at Harvard Law School. But Warren wasn't always a liberal lion.
Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican, actually.
That's Stephen Dennis.
I'm a Senate reporter for Bloomberg. Around the time that Elizabeth Warren switched parties, she became a fierce opponent of a Republican drive to make it much harder to file for bankruptcy. She fought that for a decade. It ended up passing anyways.
While her efforts ultimately failed, her warning calls were heard in 2008.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis. Our entire economy is in danger, and without immediate action by Congress, America could slip into a financial panic, and a distressing scenario would unfold.
Professor Warren was tapped to help with oversight in the government bailout.
She would excoriate bankers and their bonuses and their practices.
Why should the U.S. taxpayer alone carry Citi?
She proposed a series of tough regulations, which became the basis for much of the Dodd-Frank financial law that we have today. That sort of catapulted her to national stardom, particularly among the progressive left.
Encouraged by her newfound notoriety, Warren declared her bid for the U.S. Senate on September 14, 2011. During the race, her opponent Scott Brown tried to derail Warren by accusing her of falsely claiming Native American heritage, a controversy that earned her the nickname Pocahontas. Nevertheless, she was victorious and won the Senate seat by a comfortable margin. She used her new tenure to challenge everyone, from banking regulators and Treasury officials to members of Wall Street and Congress.
I'm really concerned that too big to fail has become too big for trial. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable. No one should be above the law.
She called for Wells Fargo CEO John Stump to resign for fraud, introduced the Bank on Student Loans Fairness Act, and reintroduced the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act. In 2016, after staying silent during the Democratic primary battle, Warren finally endorsed Hillary Clinton and had some harsh words for candidate Trump.
Donald Trump is a loud, nasty, thin-skinned fraud who has never risked anything for anyone, and that is just one of the many reasons he will never be president of the United States.
But she was wrong.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Warren wasted no time resisting Trump's agenda.
Have you ever managed or overseen a $1 trillion loan program?
I have not.
How about a $1 billion loan program?
I have not.
Okay.
In the Donald Trump era, Elizabeth Warren has been playing defense and trying to prevent Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees from rolling back protections that she helped enact.
Warren actually found herself rebuked by Mitch McConnell for reading a letter by Coretta Scott King about Jeff Sessions' record on racism during his confirmation.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
That moment became something that's on T-shirts, bumper stickers, slogans, and that really galvanized a lot of support for her. It's been very hard for Republicans to get much of anything done this year, and that's at least in part to this resistance movement that Elizabeth Warren has helped champion.
We are here to fight back.
Enough of Elizabeth Warren. Like you.
Millions of dollars are being funneled to defeat Warren in the midterm elections in 2018. But it's the rumors of a 2020 presidential bid that has further prompted powerful donors to fund her opposition, often using the same playbook of constant and ruthless ad campaigns that many believe helped Trump win in 2016. It's anyone's guess if she will endure what Hillary could not.
You know, the question for Elizabeth Warren is whether she can go from being a liberal firebrand to somebody who can regularly get 60 votes for initiatives in the Senate and 218 in the House and drive an agenda, and whether she can bring together coalitions for political victories. That's the challenge, and we'll see what happens.
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has made some powerful opponents.
He doesn't know me, never met me, doesn't know what I'm all about. I think they're very rude statements, and frankly, tell him I will remember those statements.
My message to Donald Trump and his team is that, your views of Islam are ignorant.
He's the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital and proud of it. This is how Sadiq Khan went from the son of Pakistani immigrants to a lawyer, lawmaker, and now the mayor of London. Khan's parents emigrated from Pakistan. His father was a bus driver, his mother a stay-at-home seamstress. The 10-strong Khan family squeezed into a 3-bedroom flat in South London. He wanted to be a dentist, but TV in the 1980s convinced him otherwise.
Objection!
LA law, with its swagger and ill-fitting suits, caught Khan's eye. He graduated in 1991 with a degree in law from North London University and joined a human rights firm. Khan worked a number of high-profile cases, often clashing with London's Metropolitan Police Force. But he had bigger political ambitions.
This is what being a new MP is like, squatting on a bench in the absence of an office, dealing with letters from constituents.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion here in London.
So there's just explosions, and then it was just smoke everywhere.
Everyone's just asking what's happened.
Only 2 months after Khan entered the Commons as a Member of Parliament, London was attacked by Islamist extremists.
That day will stay with me for the rest of my life.
He spoke out against the attacks both as a London MP and as a Muslim.
He has been very clear about his opposition to violence, opposition to terrorism, and has set out to make the case for a more open and peaceful Islam.
That's Thomas Penny, one of Bloomberg's Westminster correspondents.
Here is a man who is a Muslim, and he is standing up and being open and straightforward and being clear that the problem here is not Islam, but it's Islamic extremism.
In 2015, a decade after the attacks, Khan ran for mayor of London, and his faith was back in the headlines. His opponent, Zach Goldsmith, trying to link Khan to radical Islam.
The debate got again personal and nasty. The Goldsmith camp has called Khan extreme and accused him of associating with, quote, those who seek to do our police and capital harm.
It's a pattern of behaviour.
Even the former Prime Minister David Cameron repeated the allegations.
He shared a platform with Sajil Shahid, the man who trained the ringleader of the 7/7 attacks and accused the United States of bringing 9/11 on themselves.
But the smears didn't stick.
Zach Goldsmith ran a very negative campaign that was based on what people knew was a lie.
This election was not without controversy. And I'm so proud that London has today chosen hope over fear and unity over division.
After taking the mayor's office with a comfortable majority, Khan has brought a business-like efficiency to the role, scrapping expensive vanity projects like the Garden Bridge and the new Routemaster buses, which cost £350,000 each. The former lawyer who used to fight the police in court is now praised for his close relationship with them.
I was talking to a very senior police officer in the Metropolitan Police who said there was a sea change when he went into City Hall, and the police were saying how much they welcomed this because they knew where they stood and it was more straightforward to work with. So he works like a lawyer, he works like a government minister.
Khan's kept his faith at the fore. He's an outspoken voice for moderate Muslims across the world.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Now, by giving the impression that Islam and the West are incompatible, you're playing into the hands of the extremists.
The ongoing spat between Khan and US President Donald Trump escalated when Trump went after Khan, misquoting him on Twitter just hours after the terrorist attacks of June 3rd, 2017. Khan's now one of the most prominent Labour politicians in the UK. In fact, a recent poll of Londoners found Khan was more trusted to keep the country safe from terrorism than the Prime Minister or the Labour leader. His story of going from the son of an immigrant bus driver to the mayor of one of the greatest cities in the world plays well with Londoners. But can he appeal to the rest of the nation? Has Khan got his eye on the top job? And is the UK ready for a Muslim prime minister?
What does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning. He used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons in all fairness. Don't you think?
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
it debuted, the 4G wireless we have today allowed people for the first time to hit the road and explore unknown places with only a smartphone for directions. When 5G arrives, it could enable driverless cars to take us there as well. 5G stands for fifth generation mobile networks or wireless systems. It's insanely fast and can accommodate a lot more connected devices. But the reason it's being called revolutionary is because 5G will allow connected devices to speak to each other as well as people.
Right now we're living in a world where really it's a one-way experience.
That's Bloomberg tech reporter Ian King.
The network talks to your phone, you look at your phone and access data, then you send something back to the network. What we're being told about 5G is that really for the first time we're going to see machines communicating with each other over mobile networks in a meaningful way.
5G could end up being 100 times faster than what we have now, with speeds that could reach 20 gigabits per second. In plain English, that means downloading a full-length HD movie in seconds. 5G will also increase total bandwidth, which we will need in order to accommodate the growing Internet of Things. We're talking about the class of devices like internet-connected refrigerators, thermostats, dog collars, but 5G will enable many, many more.
Things like your utility network, factories, where machines are just sat there, not connected at all. Suddenly they're all going to be connected. Suddenly we're going to be able to have real-time monitoring. Other things like cars, like utility poles, like your light, the light poles.
But perhaps the biggest advance will be a huge reduction in communication lag time, known as latency. A network of driverless cars will need the speed of 5G to ping each other multiple times per second to avoid collisions. Near instantaneous data transfers could allow doctors to perform surgery remotely with a robotic scalpel. So how will all this work? First, you need to improve network density.
And that's just a fancy word for saying you put more towers out there. What we're being told is that's not actually the case with 5G.
The idea is 5G will not only use the existing mobile spectrum, but also tap into higher frequencies called millimeter waves. Millimeter waves can carry more data, but only travel short distances. This may mean you'll see a lot more of these base stations around town. And the new towers may have as many as 100 antenna ports, compared to about a dozen on 4G cell towers. So when will we get 5G? Getting 5G ready is expected to cost providers $275 billion over 7 years in the US alone. Look for the first 5G service to pop up in big cities sometime in 2019.
People think of Vladimir Putin, they think of capital P, power. And that's exactly the impression he creates. Whether it's physical power, firing different weapons, riding in various James Bond-esque modes of transportation, or tossing hapless opponents in judo. Or political power, ruling his own country with an iron fist, crushing his political opposition, or, most recently, being accused of meddling in foreign elections for his own benefit. This is how Vladimir Putin went from a poor, tough kid in Leningrad to a KGB spy to the very symbol of modern Russia. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg. His father was a factory foreman and his mother a homemaker. It is widely said that Putin's public-facing tough guy persona can be traced back to him getting into fights when he was younger, which paved the way for him to take up judo. After getting a law degree from Leningrad State University, Putin joined the KGB Foreign Intelligence Service. He spent 16 years in the KGB. When Putin returned to Russia, he began his political career.
He went to work for Anatoly Sobchak, who was then the mayor of St. Petersburg.
That's Leonid Bershidsky.
I'm a columnist at Bloomberg View.
Putin thrived in Sobchak's administration because
he was sort of considered pretty efficient city official at that time. He was very loyal to Sobchak.
So loyal and efficient that
he was noticed by Yeltsin's close circle.
And those people soon brought Putin over to Moscow to work in Yeltsin's administration, where he quickly climbed the political ladder.
Then, of course, he was promoted to Prime Minister of Russia.
That's Dmitry Trenin.
I am currently director of the Carnegie Moscow Center.
Around this time, Yeltsin and the people around him, the so-called family, decided that Putin would become Yeltsin's successor. And then this happened. The apartment bombings were carried out in 3 Russian cities, killing 293 people and injuring more than 1,000. Putin immediately accused Chechen separatists for the bombings and followed it up with action.
He was credited with having a very successful military campaign against the terrorists.
And it worked.
After that, he became an heir apparent in the eyes of the Russian people.
3 months later, Yeltsin resigned. And on his way out, a famous exchange.
He was getting into the car in the Kremlin, and the last words that he addressed to Putin before getting into his car was, "Take good care of Russia."
So Putin took over as president, and 3 months after that, won his first election. But just because Putin won the presidency, that didn't mean he had all the power. This is Michael McFall.
I was U.S. ambassador from 2012 to 2014. In the 1990s, there was a fire sale of all the things worth owning in Russia, and certain people,
the oligarchs,
did better than others in that fire sale, sometimes called privatization, and those people tended to be well connected with the Yeltsin regime, and they weren't Putin's friends. But they probably miscalculated, thinking that they could easily find a way to influence him. It became impossible almost from the start.
From that very moment, there was warfare between him and the oligarchs.
That's when Putin gave the oligarchs a choice. Putin's way?
Some of those people from the 90s managed to figure out a new way of dealing with Putin and have survived.
Or prison.
Others could not find common vision, and so they lost their assets.
Khodorkovsky once was Russia's richest person, worth $15 billion, but he ran afoul of President Vladimir Putin and spent a decade in prison.
With domestic power consolidated, Putin focused on restoring Russia's global influence.
Putin is the guy who believes in the expansionist Russian state. Georgia and Ukraine and all the other Soviet republics that split off when the Soviet Union fell apart, he still believes that they're traditional Russian satellites. A lot of his strategy is about keeping them in the orbit. That Yeltsin line, take good care of Russia, that's how he understands it.
And he used annexation and invasion, as well as oil, gas, and trade to keep former Soviet republics in Russia's orbit. In 2008, Putin's 2 terms were up, and he decided to step down as president. Dmitry Medvedev stepped in as president, and Putin went back to prime minister. But really,
Putin never left power. He pretty much continued running the country, and Medvedev was a bit of a figurehead.
There was actually a period of cooperation between Russia and the U.S. that benefited both countries during Medvedev's presidency.
Because Medvedev did not have the same negative attitude towards the West as Putin did.
But when Putin came back to run for a 3rd term, in the lead up to the 2012 election, it was widely believed that both the presidential and parliamentary elections were rigged, and Russians took to the streets. Putin blamed the protests squarely on America, and more specifically, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
He believed that she had sent, and this is his words, a signal to demonstrators.
Still, Putin won by a huge margin and set about crushing the protest movement immediately upon his return to the Kremlin. Over the next few years, Russia's economy tumbled. Putin annexed Crimea, leading to sanctions. The price of oil fell drastically. The ruble hit a new low, and America played down Russia's influence, with Obama calling Russia
a regional power.
Despite all of that, Putin's approval rating remained sky high, and then an opportunity for payback.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
In 2016, there was one candidate who called Vladimir Putin very smart.
Trump exhibited tolerance towards Putin's actions annexing Crimea, and similar views on NATO and sanctions.
Secretary Clinton didn't support any of those views.
even though Putin denies any wrongdoing,
U.S. elections.
Yes.
the U.S. has accused Russia of being behind the leaking of 20,000 Democratic National Committee emails, which many say helped Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the presidential election. Which leaves us here, with the possibility of a President Putin until 2024, positioning Russia to be the world power he always imagined it should be.
Jack Ma is Asia's richest man and most recognizable business tycoon. He's the chairman of Alibaba, China's e-commerce giant and one of the 10 largest companies in the world. Yet he still wants more.
We know where we're going. We want to be the 5th largest economy.
Big words from the man some call Asia's Jeff Bezos. He's confident, he's charismatic, and he's definitely not the average CEO. This is how a poor school teacher went from the classroom to being one of the most influential multi-billionaires in the world. Ma was born in China's southeastern city Hangzhou in 1964. His parents were traditional musician storytellers. As a teenager, he started to learn English from foreign tourists after China opened up in the late 1970s.
And then for 9 years, Jack Ma hung around outside the Hangzhou Hotel, which is now called the Shangri-La. He would get up at 5 a.m. to talk to travelers.
That's Bloomberg technology reporter Lulu Chen.
And I cover China Internet for Bloomberg.
Ma failed China's National University entrance exam twice before being admitted to local teachers' college. He graduated in 1988. He applied for 30 jobs and got rejected, including from the fast food giant KFC.
When KFC came to China, capital say,
24
people went for the job. only 3 people accepted. I was the only guy.
Then Ma got a job at a local university and taught English there for about 5 years, earning just $15 a month. On the side, he started a translation company with several friends. During a company trip to the US in 1995, Ma had his first encounter with the internet at a friend's place in Seattle.
I searched the first word, beer. I don't know why, because it's easy to spell, baby. And I see beers from Germany, beers from USA, beers from Japan, but there's no beer from China.
So he searched for the word China instead and still couldn't find anything. And that got him thinking. He wanted to build something that would put China on the world's map.
He started China Pages, a Yellow Pages-like website, but it didn't take off. Then Ma joined a government agency in Beijing to help set up a website. By 1999, the internet stock boom had gripped Wall Street, and back in his Hangzhou apartment, Ma decided to try again. With his wife and a group of friends, Ma raised $80,000 and set up Alibaba, a site that allowed businesses to sell stuff to each other.
人家美国人强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设，这方面确实比你高。但是玩信息玩软的，中国人的脑袋绝不比你长。我们在座的所有人的脑袋绝不比你们长。
By 2000, Alibaba had raised $25 million from investors, including Goldman Sachs and SoftBank.
He had no business plan and zero revenue, but his eyes was very strong eyes.
In 2003, Alibaba started Taobao, a platform for individual sellers to trade with each other, and publicly declared war against eBay, who had started to make a foray into China.
Jack Ma has this famous saying that Alibaba is a crocodile in the Yangtze River, whereas eBay is a shark in the ocean. And if they fight eBay in the ocean, then they'll lose. But if they fight them in the Yangtze River, then they have a home base advantage.
In 2007, just 1 year after it forced eBay out of China, Alibaba debuted its business-facing division on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But it delisted 5 years later as its performance sagged. But in 2014, Alibaba raised $25 billion in the world's biggest IPO in New York.
Everybody should have a dream. What if that dream comes true?
After achieving dominance in the business of e-commerce in China, Alibaba has been building an internet empire worth $472 billion, with businesses in cloud computing, online video streaming, movie production, healthcare, sports, retail, and even news media.
Alibaba buying into South China Morning Post really raised eyebrows. This is the largest English newspaper in Hong Kong, and it shows that Jack Ma's ambitions weren't limited to e-commerce. He wanted to influence not just Chinese users, but also overseas users as well.
The US has criticized Alibaba for allowing companies to sell counterfeit and poorly made goods, but in China, it enjoys the favor of China's government. It's part of Ma's company philosophy.
In love with the government, but don't marry with them.
Jack Ma's an extremely fortunate man for jumping on the internet sector so early. Note that this is a person who has no coding skills at all. He's a natural showman and a gifted public speaker and really able to convince others to believe in his vision.
Ma's vision of growing Alibaba to be the world's 5th largest economy faces strong competition at home and abroad. It will require more than just naked ambition and charisma, but Ma is great at getting himself in the right place at the right time. So far, it served him well.
Peter Thiel is a walking contradiction. He got his bachelor's and Juris Doctorate from Stanford, but speaks out about the horrors of higher education, saying college is
as corrupt as the Catholic Church was 500 years ago.
He's a staunch supporter of the free press, yet he bankrolled a lawsuit to bankrupt an independent media company.
But these were not journalists.
And most of all, he's an immigrant libertarian who's the most public supporter of Donald Trump in all of Silicon Valley.
What Trump represents isn't crazy, and it's not going away.
This is the story of how an openly gay, immigrant genius, libertarian billionaire went from tech contrarian to Silicon Valley's biggest Trump supporter. Peter Thiel was born on October 11, 1967 in Frankfurt, West Germany, to Suzanne and Klaus Thiel. Peter's family emigrated to Cleveland, Ohio when he was 1. An Ayn Rand devotee during his youth, Thiel attended Stanford University majoring in philosophy.
His Stanford experience shaped a really big part of who he decided to surround himself with.
That's Lizette Chapman.
And I cover technology and venture capital here at Bloomberg.
He and his Stanford friends made their first big splash in tech with PayPal. After selling to eBay for $1.5 billion, they would become known as the PayPal Mafia for each incredible success after PayPal. For Thiel, that began with an early, modest $500,000 investment in Facebook.
And in VC speak, early means big risk, but also big reward. He turned that initial $500,000 investment into more than $1 billion in cash.
But Thiel was just getting started with Facebook, and he went on to make a whole bunch of wildly successful investments.
From SpaceX to Airbnb to one of the largest, most powerful companies in the United States, if not the world, and of course that's Palantir.
The incredibly controversial secretive data mining startup he founded with his colleagues from PayPal. It connects data silos and then allows non-technical people to search that information for patterns. Data like
financial information, feeds from video cameras, biometric details, passport information, flight manifest.
Palantir doesn't talk much about how they collect this data, who has access to it, or what they do with it. But they have contracts with
the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission
and several other federal agencies. It's the richest company you've never heard of, valued at $20 billion. But there are plenty of obscenely wealthy people in Silicon Valley. What makes him different...
He's a complex ball of multiple contradictions.
Take college, for example. Even though college was extremely important for Thiel, there's something called the Thiel Fellowship.
In exchange for dropping out and a promise not to pursue college, Thiel would give them $100,000 each.
You basically tell people that if you get a diploma, you're saved. Otherwise you go to hell. You go to Yale or you go to jail.
Also, his relationship with the press.
Here's another contradiction. He's donated to free press initiatives, including the Committee to Protect Journalists.
But he also secretly spent tens of millions of dollars bankrolling a lawsuit filed by Hulk Hogan over the publication of a sex tape and bankrupting the independently run Gawker Media. Why did he do this? Because in 2007, one of Gawker Media's blogs, ValueAg, outed him as gay. And with the lawsuit, he
found an opportunity to get back at them by funding the lawsuit that Hulk Hogan was able to bring then, but he wouldn't have been able to do that without Thiel's money.
And finally, Thiel's biggest contradiction, his endorsement of Donald Trump.
When he was asked about his support for Trump, he was surprised at the outrage that came with it from many of his colleagues in Silicon Valley. He didn't want more of the establishment.
No matter how crazy this election seems, it is less crazy than the condition of our country.
After briefly supporting Carly Fiorina in the primaries, Thiel pivoted to Trump, donating $1.25 million to Trump and his associated super PACs in October 2016. And he didn't just help Trump financially. He gave a full-throated keynote speech supporting Trump at the Republican National Convention.
I'm not a politician, but neither is Donald Trump. He is a builder, and it's time to rebuild America.
And when Trump was finally elected, Thiel was given the reins to an enormous amount of power.
And I want to thank you, man. You have a very special guy.
He was named the transitional advisor. And in that role, he did a lot of interviewing and a lot of vetting to fill hundreds of cabinet positions and different jobs within the administration.
But it turns out Thiel's support isn't unconditional.
Talking to people who spend time with him, I have also heard that he is no longer a great supporter of Trump.
It was reported that Thiel was unhappy with the direction of Trump's presidency. Ever since, he's been mum, making no public appearances, no statements, and staying out of the spotlight altogether. Although there have been suggestions that Trump could tap Thiel for a top intelligence post or ambassadorship, there's no indication he'd accept.
He's described his relationship with politics as schizophrenic. He gets really involved, and then he runs away as fast as possible.
Whether Thiel takes a new position or simply continues as a board director at Facebook and Palantir, at just 50 years old, he's primed to wield some serious influence in technology and politics for decades to come.
Two 2016 was again the hottest year on record, and the previous 17 years have seen our 16 most scorching. Scientists overwhelmingly agree. Global warming is the culprit. And it's just getting started. Ice caps, extreme weather, wildfires, droughts, and the hits keep coming. What are we doing about it? In 2015, the world took its boldest step yet to stem climate change with a historic accord in Paris. But now comes the hard part. Nations must change energy policies and invest huge amounts of money, and they will likely do it without the United States. President Donald Trump announced on June 1st that the U.S. would withdraw from the accord.
The reality is that withdrawing is in America's economic interest and won't matter much to the climate.
Here's the situation. Decades in the making, the Paris Agreement united the U.S., China, and more than 190 other nations in a push to limit fossil fuel pollution. The The UN-sponsored plan secured pledges to cut greenhouse gases, the emissions that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, in an effort to avoid the rising seas and other environmental disasters that climate models predict. But even if all pledges are met, the globe is expected to warm by as much as 3.4 degrees Celsius this century, more than the UN target of well below 2 degrees. Meeting the Paris Agreement means that governments will have to offer more incentives for clean energy, scale back support for fossil fuels, make emissions more costly, and reduce deforestation. It's estimated that the deal will require $13.5 trillion of spending through 2030. Here's the argument. Unlike past climate pacts such as the Kyoto Protocol, each country set its own Paris targets and then promised to revisit and improve them. The U.S. was primed to play a lead role in climate change, but Trump's energy independence executive order reverses Obama-era rules and directives put in place to combat climate change, and expands production of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel. The resulting policies threaten the global fight against climate change. Without the U.S. commitment to emissions reduction, other countries may join it in abandoning the Paris Agreement. This could make it almost impossible and even more expensive down the line to stop climate change. Optimists argue that the shift to a lower carbon future is already underway. Businesses, cities, and U.S. states, such as California, are already investing in wind and solar and taking other steps to make it work.
I've actually been called an environmentalist, if you can believe that.
There's an inherent attraction to light and being human. And I think on a very deep psychological level, light is this way in which we experience the energy surrounding us in a very personal manner. My name is Matt Dilling. I'm the founder of Light Bright Neon Studio, and we manufacture, produce, and restore neon works of art and design. origins of the creative content of a lot of the work at Lightbright comes from a variety of sources. Sometimes people come with a napkin sketch. Some people come with an Adobe Illustrator file. And we have a whole design team who then we kind of work together to help create layouts of what it might look like. Scale it up and create a paper template using a pen plotter. And that paper template actually becomes our guide for what we're going to bend the neon to. We take from the office into the glass shop. We pick out the right size tubing with the right color for the right size project. From there, we heat up the glass tubing. The torches heat the glass well in excess of 1,000 degrees in order for it to get into its molten state. We heat up and bend the glass tubing to match the template. One of our chandeliers has over 100 different bends in it. So each one of those bends has to be marked for a heated up bend. We also have to allow the glass to cool between the bends so that the next area can be worked on and heated up in its own unique fashion. It turns into spaghetti, and then we have to make sure that that spaghetti lines back up and cools to the template. We use a blow hose to connect our mouth to the tube, create a volume that's closed, and we can control the pressure in there with our mouth. There's just a variety of challenges that come up inherently in working with glass. Glass can crack due to stress, and sometimes you'll just have a batch that all it wants to do when it gets near a torch is crack. After we've bent various components, we have to go in using the crossfire or the hand torch and actually weld all of those pieces together. The last step on that is then to weld on electrodes onto either end. Each one of those steps is very, very specific. I draw inspiration from so many different experiences. It's hard to come up with one thing that's particular, but one of the ways that I really am able to connect with the creative is to float. Floating is a similar experience to meditation, to psychedelics. Going into a blackened room and laying out in a body of water and salt that's heated to your body temperature, and it allows for all sort of external stimulation to fall away. And your internal world really begins to bubble up and manifest. You really get to experience a different relationship to your mind. I work with neon because I can't not work with it. It's so challenging and so rewarding. And those things are so intertwined that there's no way of separating it out. I've learned so much and continue to learn so much by working with it. I find so much inspiration in working with it, and I just continue to experience new and different things through the medium. It's that close to me at this point. Once the neon tube is completed, we have to hook it up to our manifold for bombarding. The manifold is open, a vacuum is drawn. We check the tube for leaks with our Tesla coil. We close the tube back off, and we heat it up using a very large and powerful transformer. As the tube is heated up, it releases anything that's not inert inside the tube, and we evacuate that out. We introduce the gas into it, and we seal the tube off, sealing into that tube whatever gas we introduced into it. I think my favorite part of making a neon light is when I see it lit up for the first time. Different gases, when electrified, emit different wavelengths of light. Neon gas is this very bright orange, fiery red color. Argon gas creates a very intense blue, but that light output that is produced can then be expressed in a different wavelength by coating the inside of the tubes with a phosphor coating that takes that one wavelength of light and emits a different wavelength. bring it over to the aging table, where we hook it up to an age-in transformer and allow it to settle, age the gas in that we've introduced to it. There's always a stray particle of something left inside the tube. But that time that the oxide coating can act to scrub whatever is left inside the tube while things are getting settled into place. Once the tubes are aged in, we move on to our process of assembling two halves of the fixture together in a jig, gluing up the center of the fixture to its spindle. Once the adhesive dried, we would connect the wires from the fixture together into a transformer, and we turn on power and it lights up. Part of what we love about what we do here is that we try and put out into the world the kind of things that we'd like to see. I still am surprised when it lights up. I'm still excited when I get to see it illuminated. There's an ineffable quality to it. To me, is this insight into the inner workings of the universe. It literally is. It's a way of looking at what is surrounding us in the cosmos in a new light.
a bit like an addiction. You've got to make something. You have to do something. It's borderline obsession. And every bike we build is my favourite bike at the time, and as soon as it's done, I want to build another one. Sven, cycles is something I've been thinking about ever since I started cycling in my late teens. We want bikes that ultimately you'll really enjoy riding. There's never a bike that's the same. There's always a slight change. And as we build them individually as well, they have the marks of a bike that's built by hand. Most people I know cycle have an idea of their dream bicycle. And it may be an evolving idea you've had in your head. And we've worked with a lot of people that have come to us with sketches and scrapbooks. It's really, really nice to build something that's just one-off and unique. I think a lot of people see a bicycle as two wheels and a frame in the middle. There are a lot of subtle changes and nuances in design which can change the riding characteristics quite dramatically. I'm a really big fan of modernist architecture, and the simplicity of a modernist building is really hard to achieve. And with some of our bikes, they may look very simple, but I think people should not underestimate the time and effort that goes into designing a product. Tubing is key to a bike's feel and ride. Reynolds tubing has been in my life ever since I can remember. Growing up, I could never afford a frame manufactured with their tubing. We can now put a badge on our bike saying manufactured at Reynolds, which is a sort of thing as a kid I just wouldn't have believed was going to happen. Every part of the bike has a specific tube. It's not universal. The first thing we do is get the tubes out, check they're correct, check the wall thicknesses, sand the edges, make sure it's all really clean, because if it's not clean, the tubes won't join together correctly. We build in steel because I still believe it's one of the best materials to use. It's been used in bikes since the late 1800s, and they're still using it now for a very good reason. It's the flexibility that we can replace the tube, repaint the bike, and you wouldn't know it's damaged. I just like working with it. It's very sculptural. This isn't sort of aerospace precision engineering. It's a steel rule and a marker. So when we're cutting the tubes, it's within a mil or two. But what we're trying to do is take the best from bicycle building in the past and add a little bit of modern flair to it. There's various techniques for building bicycles. We do a thing called fillet brazing, where you connect a pipe together. We use a bronze rod and a flame. We heat the tubes up to the same temperature and we fill the joint with bronze. And it gives a very, very sort of fluid, lovely, sort of quite sculptural feel. You've got to practice. You've got to be able to judge material temperatures. You've got to just look at it and you just get a feel for it. It's a stage where your tubes start to look a bit like a bicycle. My father's a jeweler. He'd make sort of very pretty things, which are lovely, but for me, they don't really have any function. What I love about bicycles, you can start on a Monday with a box of tubes. You can be riding it by the weekend, and it can last you for the rest of your life. Outside of the frame and forks, the other most important part is the wheels and tyres. When you build the wheels, you have to lace them, so there's little holes going all the way around the rim. You poke the spoke through. We do build all our wheels by hand here because a machine can't get 30 years worth of wheel building experience. Colour is very, very personal. With any of our bikes, you can have them painted whatever colour you want. We've matched one to a teapot, so we can get that scanned and we can match that, or someone's favourite item of clothing. I like to let the bike sit for 4 or 5 days minimum, just so the paint can have time to cure a little bit, and then we assemble it. We get out all the new components, and it's a case of putting them together. Some bikes you can assemble in 3 hours, some will take 3 days. And we've built bikes that cost in the £10,000 plus mark. Some people, they're saving up and this is their bike and they're going to own it for the rest of their lives. So we just want to make sure they get the right thing. I think the bike for me was the first time I had some freedom. So as soon as I had one, I was off. A lot of people still get that thrill as when they were a kid blasting down a hill, wind going through their hair. It's fun. Everyone has their favourite jacket or something that just makes them feel good. If you've got a bike that fits well, you actually feel part of it. Building bicycles as a creative outlet is fantastic. It's not something you do because you're going to get a big paycheck at the end of the day. You do it something you have a passion for it.
If you ever saw a wooden surfboard, it was probably hanging in somebody's house or underneath the deck. But kind of in the last 10 or 15 years, wood has made a big comeback. They surf wonderfully. It's beautiful and it feels great to be on one of them. I always had a love for wood and kind of passionate about things that went in the water. I've kind of been around wooden boats most of my life. There's just so much character. The way they're built, the stories that come with them, a lot of that has translated over to why we build surfboards the way we do. When we first started thinking about building surfboards, wood was the natural material we chose. They have a very high strength to weight ratio. Wooden surfboards have the longest history of use in the surf world than any other material. People have been surfing wooden surfboards since kind of the first documented history of people riding waves. The board starts in CAD, where we take a 3D model, break down the shape, and kind of create frames and templates and all the inner parts of the board that we get cut on a CNC machine. We take those frames and we just pop them out, assemble the frame into kind of a skeleton. We go out to our lumber shed, pick a bunch of cedar, and bring them into our mill shop, put glue along the edges, clamp it all together into a panel. Everything's book matched, you have symmetry in the colors and texture of the wood. Cut your outline. Take our assembled frame, gently put it down right on top of the plank. Once that foundation is started, you're basically building up the three-dimensional shape, the outside part of the board, using lots of strips that kind of interlock and fit together. Every piece of wood is going to be different, and it's all going to react differently. There are frustrations with it, but I think that's one of the things that keeps it challenging. You learn to read the kind of what the grain lines are doing and what the color of the wood is telling you. Once those rails are cleaned up, we put our top planks on. It's a little bit like putting a lid on a box. It's like, this is it. Whatever's inside that board is staying inside that board. And by tensioning some rope, you can clamp the two together. It's like a time capsule. What makes our boards unique are they are built right here in York. They're built using material that grows right here in the state of Maine. They're built 100% by hand by local craftspeople and surfers. There's a lot of time that goes into these boards, between 40 and 60 hours, start to finish. We wanted to build surfboards that were as hollow as they could be, but still be strong enough to work well. Too light and they don't surf well, but too heavy and they don't surf well. So there's a balance point there, and that's where we try to be. Taking the board off the rocker table once the top has gone on, that is by far one of my top favorite parts. It's just you and a shaping stand, a board, and a hand plane. Everything else is out of your view. It's simple, it's pleasurable, it's quiet. You can be with your thoughts and you can just kind of be present. There's something about taking a nice sharp edge tool to a beautiful piece of wood and feeling the curls coming off and knowing that every pass that you're making, you're kind of getting it closer and closer to what you have in mind. Once we've shaped it down and the board's looking like it's supposed to look like, it's time for it to go into the glassing room. 4-ounce fiberglass, laying it over the board, draping it over the edges, cutting it, applying epoxy, and on the board. Once both sides are lamb coated, it's time to put in the hardware. Drill and router and install the fin box. And on the other side, we drill and put in the leash plug and a vent. There's a lot of air just naturally inside the board, and that air wants to expand and contract with temperature changes. And that vent has a little piece of Gore-Tex fabric in it, and it allows air to kind of breathe both ways, but it doesn't allow water to get in. Once all that hardware is put in, it goes back into the glassing room. We brush a nice, beautiful, thick coat of epoxy over the whole surface, and that we call a gloss coat. That's supposed to look beautiful and glossy and shiny and flawless. You get to see that board come to life. Whatever the colors in the wood, they really come out. It just makes it look like candy. You just want to touch it and run your hands down it, and it's just kind of the icing on the cake. Once everything is hard, we put it into what we call the oven, get that epoxy to cure, really kind of bake it, and just get it to harden. Put in the fin, screw in the vent, and ship it out. We just love the idea of building something that's sustainable and long-lasting and made by hand. Kind of gives you a deeper connection to the product over something you might buy on a shelf. When a customer gets the board, they feel it. They 100% feel the amount of work and the amount of passion that went into the board. So I'm not really looking at hours and efficiency. We're looking at like doing it right and enjoying it as we go.
Ma Baoli, better known as Gang La, is one of the 4 Grand Marshals leading New York's Pride Parade this year. But in the country he comes from, being gay is still a social taboo. The CEO of a Beijing-based internet company is on a mission to improve the lives of millions of gay men in China.
对于每一个 LGBT 人群来说，即使这个国家不允许你跟同性爱人结婚，但是你仍然要勇敢地去选择你自己的生活，你仍然应该拥有幸福生活的权利。
Ma's company Blue City runs an app and a website specifically for gay men. Blued is one of the biggest gay social networking apps in the world, with an estimated 30 million registered users. Unlike most other apps, Blued is more than just dating or hookups.
大家可以在我们这个软件里面找他自己的情感，然后可以阅读相关的内容，然后可以进行一些娱乐，比如玩游戏啊，比如看直播啊等等。
Back in 2000, when Ma studied at a police school in northern China, he realized he didn't feel like everyone else.
因为他们都找女朋友，然后谈恋爱，但是我对长得好看的同性的男生，我反而觉得对我更有吸引力。所以那个时候我就到互联网上去找这样的一些资料，然后希望能够告诉我自己我到底是谁。互联网上所有的信息都是负面的，都是错的，就是说同性恋要电击疗法，要被治疗，然后要吃药等等。
After visiting some foreign websites with different attitudes to homosexuality, Ma created his own site for a Chinese audience, encouraging people that
他们也是正常的，他们不用自卑，然后也不用自杀。
Even though attitudes towards homosexuals are slowly changing in China, it's still a social stigma. The virtual world of Blued, where members can be open about their sexuality, is for most a striking contrast to their real lives. This is live streaming, a function added to Blued in late 2015, right as the internet craze was starting to take off in China. Many self-made stars like Jin make decent amounts of money by receiving audiences' virtual currencies and gifts.
我们不是彼此的初恋，初恋这种事儿多不靠谱啊。
For Kyle and Klaus, a couple who have come out, live streaming on Blued means something different.
其实我经常会收到很多粉丝的一些互动的留言，就是类似就是说你们让我们看到了同志情侣之间的一些希望啊，我看到这样的留言我是很欣慰。
The government's rules for acceptable content online may shift quickly in China, with LGBT material in a grey area. Many companies feel the chill of the recent internet crackdown, but Blue City still runs as usual. Ma has won the Chinese government's trust by helping with HIV prevention among gay men. A third of the company's staff are dedicated to screening pornographic and politically sensitive content.
我不太多的愿意去对抗，我更多的愿意去对话，去改变他们的想法。我觉得这个可能在中国来说是更有效的。
In the past 5 years, Blue City has grown from a team of 7 people to a promising business with about 250 staff. Ma said the company earned over $15 million last year, mainly through advertising and selling virtual currencies to live streaming audiences. Now the company is expanding overseas.
我希望吧，通过我们的努力，Blue能够成为全球第一家在美国纳斯达克或者是纽交所上市的这样的同志互联网公司。
This is Rich Chiga. He's a Chinese rapper by way of Indonesia, and he's very popular on the internet. This is Joji. He's a Japanese-Australian singer, and he's also very popular on the internet. Plus, Joji invented the Harlem Shake meme. Let me say that again. This guy, Joji, in the blood bathtub, invented the Harlem Shake meme. But we'll come back to that. So Rich and Joji are both signed to 88 Rising, an entertainment company hoping to build a lasting global brand that will outlive singular moments of virality. They primarily create content combining Asian culture and hip-hop, a formula that apparently pleases the internet gods greatly. They've only been around for 18 months, but they're already putting up major label numbers.
I think that we have an unprecedented collective of talent, a group of like predominantly Asian artists, you know, really like making waves globally, which from an independent point of view as well.
88's founder, Sean Miyashiro, cut his teeth launching Vice's electronic music channel, Thump. But quickly, Sean became interested in life beyond dance music.
I knew that after launching a whole content platform that I have kind of the ability and the know-how to do it again, but like for what was the question.
So Sean moved to the Bronx to start over and figure it out. He couldn't afford an office space, so he worked out of his car at the top of a grimy parking garage.
Everything kind of started here. If you look around, this is my environment. This is my serenity, really. 88 Rising was built here. Built on the grounds of LA Fitness residence in a parking garage. I was living in the Bronx. I'm just like, damn, where the hell do I go? So I just come up here and I I just kind of figure things out every single day. Being like, okay, what the hell is this thing? Coming here was kind of like my own kind of private office, basically. Like, to be honest, I would even go to the bathroom here. I would like take pisses here, you know what I mean? Like, it was, it's just too far to go back down there. When I need Wi-Fi, I'd spend a good part of the day at Dunkin' Donuts. Hi, how are you? Can I get a chicken snack wrap?
Before 88 Rising officially launched, Sean caught a surprise break in the form of a Twitter friendship with a funny 16-year-old kid from Indonesia named Brian, who taught himself English by watching Rubik's Cube tutorial videos on YouTube. Seriously, that's true.
I thought his Twitter was genius, from the future, just crazy, and like just the shit that he was saying, like the memes he was making. But I didn't know that he rapped or anything like that. I really didn't, and he came up with that stick like 2 weeks later.
12 in the morning, pop shells for a living and baby gon' smell blood trail every minute road.
Dat Stick was Brian's first ever attempt at making a rap song, and it immediately went viral.
Everything was great about it, but the one thing that I noticed is the song was hard as hell. Just like everything about it, man. Just like, it was menacing, bro.
Soon after the video dropped, Brian signed with 88 Rising.
I'll FaceTime with Rich. Sorry for calling you Rich Chiga on my phone, Rich. Brian, he gets like super pissed off that he's saved in my phone as Rich Chiga. He's like, dude, am I not a human to you? What's good, bro?
What's good, brother?
How you doing?
Doing great. I did the sound check.
How was it?
It was tight.
So, Brian could definitely rap, but some viewers understandably took offense at a Chinese kid satirizing rap cliches and calling himself Rich Chiga. But if a group of well-known rappers saw the video and genuinely liked it, that could at least help validate Brian as a legit hip-hop artist. Plus, it could be really funny.
It was just kind of an idea that I just had on the spot. Everything that rappers say is better and funnier and smarter and wittier. You know, it's just more entertaining. We just edit it as tight as possible, put it up, and it really worked.
Yo, this nigga got a pouch on and a Reebok pouch. This is the hardest nigga of all time.
You said when you come for a chigga like me, that was dope.
It's just lit, and I think people will take it as a joke at first, but it's like if he ran with that and kept doing more videos like that, it's just lit.
You know, I'd never been to America before, and like all of a sudden, just like I see like all the rappers that I listen to just like reacting to my stuff, and I was like, what? How did this happen?
The reaction video also went viral, and even led to a remix of Dat Stick featuring Wu-Tang's Ghostface.
I'll get on that track. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Really, on the remix?
Yeah. Oh, you know him?
And yeah, the remix went viral too. Brian has since acknowledged the misstep in his name and claims he may change it. But for the time being, he's still Rich Chigga to his fans. An ever-growing global audience, hungry for more releases from emerging talent around the world.
I didn't know that it was gonna be this impactful and this important to people, and I'm very thankful and blessed that it has. And every day now that I wake up, it's like it's just like a new mission every day.
A major part of that mission involves Joji. Remember the bloody bath guy? He's a former YouTube personality in the middle of a career transition.
The sound of this song, Will He, it's like a trap song that you can like slow dance to. Awkward prom shit, you know what I mean? I used to do crazy episodic internet videos. It was going well, and one day it was me and a few friends just in a room. We were casually chilling, and then someone plays the song, and it's brand new at the time. I happened to have a lot of costumes laying around, so I told the other guys, I was like, get in these costumes and let's just dance to it. Like, who cares? We were like, okay, let's just go crazy at the drop. So that video goes up. I go to sleep, and the next morning, everyone's doing it. Like, next morning. That taught me a lot about the internet, how people want to just be a part of something. And from that point on, something changed, and I was a little better at understanding demographics and people and, what they want to see and what they want to hear. I was friends with a couple other artists who were affiliated with 88, and then I also started to realize that 88 is the bridge between Western and Asian entertainment, and I really wanted to be part of that.
Joji just released the In Tongues EP, his first project as a serious artist.
Joji's In Tongues record came out a couple weeks ago. It's #2 on Billboard on the R&B charts, which is crazy for, independent release, and he's like a brand new artist.
And the success is even more impressive, knowing he went from creating something like this.
It's just Taco Bell. What could possibly go wrong?
To creating something Tonight, Rich Chigga has a show in New York City. Tickets sold out in an hour.
I came here, I'm first online. I was here at 1. I was the third person online.
So why'd you get here so early?
Because I want to see Rich Chigga. I want to touch him.
What do you guys think of Joji?
He's
That's my dad, son. You guys cop the new EP or like?
Yeah. I woke up at 6 in the morning just to cop that shit. And then I listened to it, and that shit started making me cry.
This is actually kind of exciting. Every time, this never gets old. Like, you live online and social media, but like, there's nothing like just being with the people.
Back on my bullshit, man, you can't believe me. Who the fuck just said I should quit?
More often than not, viral success happens by accident. And then after an appearance on Ellen or Jimmy Kimmel, the creator's star power fizzles out. But Idiot Rising has figured out how to turn potential gimmicks into brands with an actual following that keeps coming back for the next thing.
Oh, shit!
So keep an eye out for Idiot's next move. But more than likely, it won't be covered on network television or terrestrial radio. Although, as they've already proven, nowadays that really doesn't matter.
Online retailer Farfetch is betting it can shape the future. This is its concept store, showcasing the latest in retail tech.
How do you capture all of that fantastic information that you gather in store with customers' touch and feel products? And we created a concept called the Connected Rail. And this is using a combination of RFID and ultrasound. The RFID signal recognizes the product, and the ultrasound recognizes the movement. Take the product off, and then you'll start to see your products appear. And essentially, it's like online browsing behavior. Whichever products you touch and pick up in the store are automatically sent to your app. This is effectively what you've created is your in-store wish list. In the middle, you'll see essentially a hologram of the product. What the customer sees, they control the experience on a touch device. What this allows the customer to do is take elements of products and then add their own style to it. Right, so this is the connected mirror. So in this example, I see my products. I select a coat, and that's tried it, and it's slightly too big for me. So what I can do is choose an alternative size and send a request to the sales associate, and they'll bring that size to me in the fitting room mirror. You'll also see that we've got some product recommendations here. Crucially, the sales associate's able to push items into the mirror from their device. If you wanted to, you could simply use the mirror and pay and go. Your items would then be packed and dispatched to you afterwards.
Do you want me to turn you so you're looking outwards? Yes, please. How about there? First time we came out with B, Jade said, "It feels like I've been released from prison." Do you want these, Mrs.?
Definitely.
Definitely. Right. Yeah. And she could say hello to everybody, people she hadn't seen for months.
It's
It's Jade.
Oh. So you can talk to Jade through this.
Hi, Katie. She's there.
Hi.
Every time anyone's seen her, they want to know why she's there. And it's kind of the opposite of when you're in a wheelchair and people see you and they kind of go, oh, should I look? I don't know what the right protocol is. When there's a tiny robot with its bright little eyes going around just looking happy everywhere, it really opens you up for conversation.
You've got some friends here, look.
Hiya! When I saw her for the first time, I remember thinking, this is going to change things. This is one of those points where if this was a book, this would be the cliffhanger. have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means that I have a lot of dislocations, there's a lot of pain, and a lot of seizures and whatnot. So I can end up on my own in my room for long periods of time. A lot of the time, with a condition like my own, of course there's the pain, and the pain is bad, and the dislocations are bad, and the seizures and being in paralysis and never knowing whether you're going to be able to wake up properly tomorrow, that's bad. But what's worse still is being able to count the number of people you see a day on one hand.
Are you ready?
Sure am, I'm just hoping the connection's going to stay.
Yeah, me too. Alright, here we go.
When you're used to just the same little metre by metre and a half window every day, and you've been there for months, being able to just see the sky from somewhere else, or the tops of trees, or a sign, is incredible. Or being able to have that kind of chat in the car that most people will probably take for granted.
I'm going to go past Grandma and Grandad so you can give them a wave. Now, if Jade is particularly seizure-y, she can still take part. And that's brilliant, really, because before she would just be left in a bed or in a house with just her carers. It's quite a small world, that.
Right, so there's one of them. Here, this costume I'm busy making at the moment. When I'm not on bed rest and I'm not just wearing pyjamas all the time, I enjoy being able to dress as different characters and go to Comic Cons and that kind of thing, because it just lets me show a different side of myself, and it's a bit of fun. If you can't go out that often, you've got to enjoy it when you do. Was that? That's good. It's one of those weird things where I want to not have to use B because I want to be well enough to be able to go to those places myself. Like, it really makes a big difference to me to be able to go into school. But the thing is, with my condition fluctuating all of the time, I can't go into school reliably. And so far it's interesting. Still a few little things that we need to work out, but for the most part I think it's going fairly well, and it's brilliant because I can really tell the difference between today and yesterday. How yesterday I forced myself to go into school when I wasn't very well and I was really tired afterwards and ended up having loads of seizures, whereas today I've been able to do all of the work, I've been able to keep a clear head and not be ill, which means I'm able to be more focused on my schoolwork.
So there is my first step of working, is to simplify root 8. The algebra test is next week.
Now I'm trying to make friendships which I'll be able to maintain with B. Before that, I end up letting people down quite often. B gives me hope, yeah. She's just always there. And if I can't do something, she can. And if I need sort of assistance to be able to make commitments, then she's there, and she means that I feel like a more valuable person because I'm more reliable.